Very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, ministers, for coming. My initial questions will be to the Minister of Finance, Minister Freeland. Mr. Freeland, what's the deficit this year?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Perkins, and this gives me an opportunity to say how glad I will be to present the fall economic statement on Monday in the House of Commons, and there will be full transparency for all Canadians and all MPs about Canada's financial position.
Thank you. When you delivered the budget, you said it would never be, it won't be above 40 billion, and that there are guardrails. But we know that the parliamentary budget officer has said otherwise, that you're already through that, plus you've added more on the GST. So can you tell me, is the deficit going to stay at the $40 billion that you said was the maximum in the budget?
I'm very glad, Mr. Perkins, to hear you quoting the parliamentary budget officer. He reported very significantly this summer that Canada's fiscal position is sustainable. Indeed, this summer he said that our fiscal position is sustainable over the long term, and that even a permanent swing of 1.5% of GDP would be permissible while retaining Canada's fiscal sustainability. That is really good news for all Canadians, especially entering as we are, as my colleague, the Minister of Industry, has just said, a time of real global uncertainty.
But as the Minister of Finance, you must know what the deficit is, whether or not, since we're almost 3/4 of the way through, are you going to stick to the $40 billion you told Parliament you would not go above, that was your fiscal guardrail? It wasn't going to go above that.
Thanks again for the question, Mr. Perkins. I do want to be very clear and assure all MPs and all Canadians that Canada's public finances are sustainable. Canada has the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. We have the lowest deficit in the G7. Our public finances are sustainable, as the PBO has made clear, and I am really looking forward to delivering the fall economic statement on Monday in the House of Commons.
So, since you've been minister, you've delivered a number of budgets. Have any of those budgets that you delivered, has the deficit come in as projected? Has any one of them come in as projected?
Actually, Mr. Perkins, we are delivering a far stronger and faster rate of fiscal consolidation than anyone predicted, including our budget documents, when COVID first hit and when Canada experienced the deepest recession since the Great Depression. The recovery led by our government's economic plan has been significantly stronger and faster than the recovery which Canada saw when the Conservatives were in office after the financial crisis, which was a shock, but a much milder shock than the COVID recession. And I'm very pleased that Canada is on track for a soft landing. Inflation has been in Bank of Canada's target range for 10 months for all of this year, and interest rates have been coming down. That is really good news for Canadians, and that did not happen by accident.
I spent most of my life before being elected in 2021 in the private sector as an executive in a number of corporations as well as on boards. And if the CFO for my company missed its financial projections every single year, they wouldn't be the CFO for very long, neither would the public markets. So why should you remain as CFO of Canada, since you can't seem to hit a single target you set?
As I said, Mr. Perkins, I strongly disagree with the premise. Canada has had the fastest rate of fiscal consolidation in the G7, and we are today reaping that positive harvest with inflation in the Bank of Canada's target range for all of this year, with interest rates coming down, with the Canadian economy experiencing a soft landing. And Mr. Perkins, you spoke about the private sector. The credit markets show they approve of Canada's fiscally sustainable position. If Canada were to, if Canada's cost of debt were to be, I am answering.
If I could
Mr. Perkins,
I'll
if I
ask
may
it a
just
different
conclude
way.
my sentence,
Sure.
please. If Canada were to pay what the UK pays for its debt, we would be every single year spending more than $9 billion more. If we paid what the U.S. pays for its debt, we would be
So your
every
officials-
single year paying
Minister-
more than $11 billion
Minister,
more.
your
That
officials
is a
have
market
leaked-
verdict on the strength of our fiscal
Your officials
position.
have leaked to the media that the deficit will be $60 billion or more. So is it going to be that, higher, or lower?
Mr. Perkins, because a Conservative filibuster has blocked the work of our Parliament.
Minister, the only
it has
filibuster
been-
is your
it has
unwillingness to
been a
produce the
challenge.
documents.
No,
But I would
look
ask you
forward
a
to
simple
presenting
question.
the fall
Is the
economic
deficit
statement
going to be
on Monday.
higher or lower than the $60 billion your officials have leaked to the media?
I think that it is very important not to cast any doubt on Canada's financial credibility. So I want to take this opportunity to be very clear that Canada's fiscal position is
Will it be
strong
above or
and
below $60
sustainable
billion?
and continues
Yes or no? It's a simple question.
to be
Why won't you answer
the
whether or not it'll be
strongest
above
in
or below
the
60
G7.
billion? Did you have your officials leak that on purpose to control
thank you, MP
the
Perkins.
expectations?
Your time is up. I'll now turn it over. MP Patzer, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, ministers, for being here today. Minister Freeland, just really quickly, can you tell me what the national debt is? Just quickly, please.
I feel that the MPs at this committee have a lost vocation as members of the Finance Committee. But let me just say to you and to all of your colleagues that notwithstanding the Conservative filibuster, I'm very glad that we'll have a chance to present the fall economic statement on Monday, and we will fully disclose all of the relevant figures. And I do want to emphasize, because people have been calling it into question, that Canada's public finances remain sustainable and remain the best in the G7.
Okay, so you are, you said that your fiscal guardrail was a $40 billion deficit. Your department's leaked out $60 billion. Now, it'd be quite convenient if you're leaked out $60 billion and you slide in at somewhere in between at about $50 billion to see, see, they were wrong. But that still is blowing past your guardrail that you said was in place. So I don't know why you can't just simply say no to the deficit potentially being $60 billion for this particular fiscal year. Why is that?
I am not going to comment on hypotheticals, and I am not going to comment on leaks. What I can say very clearly is that Canada's public finances are sustainable. As the Parliamentary Budget Officer reported in the summer, Canada's debt to GDP ratio, which is the crucial metric, is the lowest in the G7, and our debt to GDP ratio is on a declining track. That is the key measure of sustainable public finances. It is a great strength of Canada, and it's really important for us all to be clear about that.
Okay, so earlier in your remarks, I think it was in response to another question that you said that we had a 1.5% GDP swing that could be allowed when it came to a hit to our economy. Are you aware that your government has just implemented a policy that will directly blow a 1% GDP reduction into the economy?
I'd like to be clear, Mr. Patzer. I was quoting the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who concluded in his independent study of the public finances that not only, but that's important. It wasn't. I just, for the record, want to be very clear.
So you don't agree with the Parliamentary Budget Officer?
No, but I want to be clear that I was quoting his analysis, and it is important, given some of the partisan assertions being made, to bring that objective analysis to bear, to really make clear to Canadians and to international capital markets that our public finances are clearly sustainable. That's why I quoted that analysis of his.
Okay, so you're comfortable with a 1.3% loss in government revenue then?
Again, that is exactly the partisan twisting and falsehood that I'm being very clear to counter.
Okay, so that was Conference Board of Canada that said that. It was Deloitte that said that, not
No, this was an
me,
analysis of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And again, given the hypotheticals, the assertions being made, it's important to be clear to Canadians and to capital markets that our public finances are sustainable. That's what I'm insisting on right now.
Okay. despite all of that, the emissions cap is going to blow a 1% hole in the Canadian economy, and it's going to cost government coffers a 1.3% drop in revenue. Ms. Freeland, the carbon tax is causing a huge pain for consumers. The cost of everything is going up. Groceries are going to go up $800 next year for average people, and you are going to increase the carbon tax. Are you comfortable in continuing to increase the carbon tax on Canadians when they continue to go through a cost of living crisis, and it continues to go on day after day? You're comfortable with that?
The fact is that 8 out of 10 Canadians get more back through the Canada Carbon Rebate. And there is some really good news right now, which is Canadian businesses are getting back $2.5 billion through the small business carbon rebate. That is money directly to Canadian businesses and will help them at an important time.
Okay, so when this meeting started, the Canadian national debt was $1.24 trillion. And by the time this meeting is over, just the time of this meeting alone, an additional $10 million is going to be added onto that alone. Just today, an additional $110 million will be added onto the deficit. And that's without you spending any money, Minister. But it's a byproduct of the reckless spending of your government. Are you comfortable with that much extra debt being added onto the national debt for my kids, for my grandkids, for the next generations to be saddled with before they even hit the economy? You're comfortable with that?
What I am not comfortable with is misleading statements about the true state of Canada's public finances. The reality is our public finances are sustainable. That is the judgment of the markets. That is the judgment of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Our debt to GDP ratio is on a downward path. That is the crucial measure. And I want to be very clear that if the Conservatives are proposing cuts and austerity, cuts to health care, cuts to dental care, cuts to early learning and child care, that is a recipe for failure and austerity for Canada and Canadians. That is a recipe for hurting people and for hurting our economy.
Merci, Madame la Ministre. Monsieur Patzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question to Minister Champagne, to follow up on your last statement. Since we are dealing with supplementary estimates here, in other words, additional spending for your department, can you tell me how much is in these supplementary estimates for toner cartridge that was used to blank out 30,000 pages on the Green Slush Fund?
Mr. Perkins, I'm always happy to come at the committee when you're there. I must say this is the best gift I have before Christmas. You know, I know you're a man of good heart. You know that what we did was to comply with the requests of this committee to produce 29,000 pages. I know it's a lot of reading for Christmas, but I don't expect a Christmas card from you this year on this one.
It's all blanked out. You're, of course, getting a Christmas card from me, but it was all blanked out. Minister Freeland, I would like to ask you, I have some sympathy for you because every budget that you've presented, you've said this is the guardrail, this is the deficit, we're not going beyond it, and in every one you've missed it. So can you tell me who is telling you that you have to go through in the year after your deficit? Is it Mr. Carney or is it the Prime Minister?
I share my colleague, the industry minister's view that you have a good heart, Mr. Perkins. Unfortunately, I have to correct and strongly disagree with your core assertion. The fact is, notwithstanding Conservative repeated attempts to muddy the waters, Canada has had the fastest fiscal consolidation in the G7 since the COVID recession. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. We have the lowest deficit. Markets are rewarding us for that with cheaper debt than the UK and the US. This is what a fiscally responsible plan is. And I would like to point out that we are on track to achieve a soft landing from the COVID recession more successfully than experts predicted at the peak of that recession, which is deeper than the Great Depression, and a much quicker recovery than Stephen Harper was able to deliver.
Because you never meet it. So if I could go on to my next question. On the oil and gas cap, Did Finance do an economic analysis, your department, on what the impact of that cap would be on reducing the production in the oil and gas industry and thus on our economy?
Very glad to have a question about the oil and gas industry, because one of the important infrastructure investments by our government is to complete the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is in service today, and that is estimated to be adding by the Bank of Canada 0.25% to Canada's GDP. That was the result of an activist government that stepped in when the private sector could not get the job done.
Fair enough,
and
Minister,
is
but I
adding to
noticed that you
Canada's
didn't
economy.
answer the question of whether or not the department, yes or no, did an economic analysis to impact that cap. If you could quickly, because I have another question I need to ask you.
No, let me be very clear. If the Conservatives are sincere in believing that the oil and gas industry contributes to the Canadian economy and to our national security, as do I would like to hear the Conservatives talking about the value that the Trans Mountain Pipeline brings to our economy. And I have not heard that a single time.
I take it that's
and
a
that
no
shows,
since you're refusing
that shows
to answer
extreme
the question.
hypocrisy.
So former Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poles says we're in a recession. You say we're in a vibe session. Can you tell me what people are experiencing in a vibe session that's different than a recession?
What I can say, Mr. Perkins, is that after a very challenging time with high inflation and high interest rates, Canada now has had inflation within the Bank of Canada's target range for 10 months, and I am glad to be able to quote the governor of the Bank of Canada, who said, speaking to the Senate Banking Committee, we are no longer trying to get inflation down. Government spending is not pushing against us getting inflation down. We have brought it down. Again, that is not a liberal or a conservative. That is the independent governor of our central bank, and that is something we should all celebrate.
Are the 2 million people experiencing food banks, a record number under your government, are they experiencing the recession versus the vibe session differently, or are they in a recession when they cannot pay or get food?
It is the height of hypocrisy for Conservatives to claim to care about the most vulnerable. Conservatives are the party that voted against a national school food program. Conservatives are the party that is voting against dental care. Conservatives will have a chance tomorrow to vote on whether seniors should be able to get dental care.
Canadians are just
That's enough. Thank you very
experiencing it
much.
differently.
Thank you.